Good morning, everybody. My name is Cynthia Gross. I'm part of the Bureau of Career and Technical Education at BDE. My responsibilities include promoting non-traditional student enrollment within career and technical education programs. Thank you for joining this session this morning. First, let's be clear about some terms. Non-traditional students are those who have chosen a CTE program in an occupation where individuals of their same gender make up less than 25% of the workforce. The federal government requires all states to strive to improve the numbers of students choosing non-traditional careers. This is one of the Perkins indicators. So where is Pennsylvania as a state as far as non-trad performance goes? Well, in 2019, the state's performance on the Perkins non-trad concentrator indicator was 15.14%. That year, the state met at least 90% of its target at the federal level. So that's good. Female non-traditional students made up a larger share of the state's total that year than males do, and that has always been the case. But work remains to be done with both genders. Okay, next slide. Some federal requirements to talk about. One caution as we begin this discussion. I want to remind everyone that Title IX legislation and the vocational education guidelines make it illegal for schools that receive federal funds to promote, sponsor, or implement single-sex CTE programming or events. Now, I know some CTE schools may have done this in the past, and there are some very popular events targeting just one gender. For example, girls who code, women in the trades, men in nursing, etc. Those come to mind. If those events are implemented, advertised, sponsored by local or national organizations, we aren't concerned about them. Those organizations most likely are not bound by Title IX requirements. But for schools offering CTE, which is probably everybody's school who's on this webinar with us right now, Title IX is a requirement. And it's time to rethink our recruiting strategies that would target only one gender. As the session title says, we're talking about non-traditional students, not just females, not just males. Our goal is to offer all students the opportunities to make authentic choices based on their personal interest and aptitudes, to freely choose a program that teaches the skills necessary to have a career that enables them to earn a family-sustaining wage, and to be productive citizens. So to get us started, in the chat feature, everybody know where the chat's at? Great. I want you to answer a question, but do not post it until I say the word waterfall. I'm going to give you a question, but do not hit send, enter, whatever it says there. So the question is, what are you currently doing to recruit non-trads into your programs? Remember, don't send it. Should be typing something. Okay, waterfall. And I'm scrolling and scanning along with you, looking at the chat. Open enrollment. Show non-trads and promotional materials. As you're scrolling down through, sort of look and, are there some that you're also doing there? I'm noticing a lot of similarities in what people are typing in, which is fine. Who has responses similar to yours? It's possible it might be someone you can collaborate with later and say, hey, how's that working out for you? Also, take a look as you scroll through the answers there. Are any of those gender specific? Remember, I just talked about this idea that now we want to get away from any gender specific sort of CTE programming. So maybe someone typed in a gender specific one because truthfully, that's what they've been doing. So something else to think about. All right, I'm going to close the chat off for myself now. Thanks for typing things in, folks. So what's working as far as non-trad CTE recruitment goes? Well, let's look at some very basic sorts of data to get you started. Now, if you don't know the answers to the questions I'm going to ask, this is where you can start gathering some data to then use to decide how to move forward. So first question, this one should be easy. Are your CTE programs fully enrolled? Second question, what is the total number of students who visited CTE programs on tours at your school last year? How many of those students who visited are now enrolled in a CTE program at your school? Another question to consider, how many of your programs are non-traditional by gender? In most CTCs, high schools, post-secondary institutions, some but not all programs are non-traditional. It's good to know where you're actually trying to target your efforts on, which programs. So what's the total number of the enrollment in those non-traditional programs or SIP codes? And another question to think about as a first step in gathering data is, what is the total number of non-trad students in your school, no matter which program? What's your total numbers? Okay, how'd you do? Did you know most of those answers? Probably not right off the top of your head, but you could easily find them, right? None of those were hard sorts of percentages. There was almost no math involved in the answers to those questions. So it's a starting spot. If you look at the numbers for your school, you'll realize that increasing any or all of those numbers I just asked you about will have a positive impact on your potential non-trad enrollment. This gives you a starting point to work from. And that slide doesn't want to advance. Erin.
There you go. You got it. You just need to go
No,
one more.
you're one too far for me. I need the one that says increasing non-trad enrollment. Why is it not working?
There you go. You hit that button right there. And like, or go and one more.
There we go. I must have forgot to hit the other one. My fault. Okay. Okay, so now the question is, how do we increase numbers of male and female students in educational programs that are non-traditional for them? Well, some good news is that many schools are now achieving their recruitment goals for non-traditional students. How did they do that? There's a lot of different ways. At this point in time, most schools have put posters up in classrooms that depict students of both genders in a program. Posters are also in the hallway. I see banners every time I go visit a school. Websites have been updated for the most part to depict students of both genders in the program areas. And most school staff have been part of some sort of a professional development around the idea of gender bias and being welcoming to everyone, being inclusive. So what's left to do? If those actions haven't raised non-trad enrollment at your school as much as you would like, then the next steps are up to your school to determine, because every one of your schools and your staff are unique. There's been no one magic answer that has worked everywhere. If there were, I would have shared it years ago. I will share some resources in a bit that may give you some new ideas though. As we saw in the chat earlier, most of your schools are doing some things that you expect will yield or have yielded results. How long have those strategies been in place? What positive impact have they really had on non-traditional enrollments in CTE programming? How do you know? Where's your data? whatever strategy or initiative you choose to move forward with. I can't stress enough the importance of gathering data before you begin, so you have a baseline, during the implementation, and then at the conclusion. Gathering data is essential for determining the success or the growth opportunities of programs and initiatives. Because if you don't know where you started, you won't be able to see how far you go. Speaking of data, in October 2020, Heckinger report about CTE found that, quote, young people may select programs because those professions are familiar to them and employ people who look like them, unquote. Based on that quote from the report, here are some other data points to consider. Are students familiar with your CTE programs? Is this their first exposure to CTE? When are students first hearing about CTE programs? What part do you play in career exploration activities for younger students as part of the CEW standards? Let's put your answers to that one in the chat. And don't wait for me, just type in. I'll read the question to that again. What part do you play in career exploration standards, in career exploration activities for younger students that have some tie into the CEW standards? And we're looking for any responses in the chat now. Summer camps after school, partnership with a local middle school, seeing ideas coming in. IEP meetings, that's important as far as the inclusion and the transition from middle school to come into CTE, absolutely. Shine program, I've heard of that successfully a few places. That's a great program. Other after school programs, yeah. Those are all ways we're having outreach so that it's not a student's first exposure to CTE is when they're doing that 8th or 9th grade tour through your building. So, career expo visits for students in 4, 5, 8, and 10. Okay, covering the gamut there. That's a good job. From, can't read it. Sorry, I couldn't read your name. Okay, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Feel free to continue typing in there. It's fine. Because people are interested in what everybody else is doing, of course. Some other questions to think about based on that Heckinger report. Do students know someone in the career path? How can you help students that are not yet taking CTE courses to meet professionals in non-traditional fields, to see people who look like them and are working in a field that maybe would be of interest to them? Here's a good one to consider. Are your CTE students so enthusiastic about their program that they help recruit their peers? Satisfied customers can be your best recruiters. So you can have your students help get the word out there because they really like their instructor, they like the program, it's important to them. Those are recruiting tools too, recruiting assets, let's think of them that way. How does your school use social media to promote its programs? Are you part of that effort? Are students part of that effort? Feel free to stick that in the chat too if you'd like to, but I'm just going to keep going so we move along. On tour days, do the CTE instructor and the classroom seem inviting and comfortable to the visiting students? In other words, when students walk into the room for a tour, is the equipment they first see intimidating and unfamiliar? Or is there a connection to something they already know or have experience with? So that's a lot of questions to think about. And how would you gather data to answer them? Well, that might be a starting point for your recruitment efforts. Any or all of those questions. And probably not all of them, because I don't want to put you in the mode of feeling like you have to scattershot your efforts. As Claudia Morrell talked about yesterday in her session, it's important to help to try and be able to focus your efforts onto 1 or 2 strategies and try and work, get your data, see that you have results or don't have results, and then change course. If you're scattered too wide, it's hard to really see what had an impact and what's peripheral impact. So remember that collecting and analyzing the data helps your schools to avoid wasting time, resources, and talent on efforts that have produced limited or no results in the past. Again, you won't know if there are results if you aren't gathering data regularly. But of course, let's take the other side of that triangle. Not everything can be measured. That's true. Recent professional development from BCTE about non-trad enrollment has focused on the NEAR model, which states that creating learning environments that are attractive and equitable to all student groups depend on the characteristics of normalizing, empowering, inclusive, and relevant. So the NEAR model asks questions such as, is there a sense of familiarity to at least some CTE programs? Is there a connection to CTE from the students' lives? Model also asks, do students feel secure enough to take risk, whether it's program choice or learning new skills within a program? Are students confident in their abilities, and are they able to help others learn? With the letter I have a bunch of things to consider. Is there a feeling of belonging in your CTE programs? What are the results of recent school climate surveys? Do you do school climate surveys? Do students feel safe in your programs? Check for any implicit bias in your outreach to potential students. Implicit means we aren't aware of it, without consciously checking for those sorts of things. And are there any barriers that would preclude some students from choosing to be part of CTE? What are those? What can you do to eliminate them? Maybe that's something you've already conquered. And for R, do presentations connect programs to students' family, community, and cultural experiences? How does this career that they're thinking about impact the larger world? Where's the hook for the program? Excuse me. Pardon me. Okay, now I'd like to go to the PDE website and look at non-traditional programs. And let's see if it works from here. If not, I have them loaded. There we are. Okay. So here's the website for non-traditional programs. On PDE's side, it's within the Perkins pages. You'll find it. I want to point out to the very top banner on the program. A couple of years ago, PDE was doing a rebranding, relaunch, and all new and better effort for everybody's web pages in the department. Well, I heard that was going on. One day I happened to click on my non-trads page to find some information for someone. And lo and behold, what I saw was not the pictures you see now. It was those stereotypical pictures you might expect to see of a female nurse and a male carpenter and a male plumber, etc., etc. You can imagine my reaction when I saw the new and improved non-trad website. So in that case, I had to be proactive, just like you need to maybe take that effort at your schools and look at what's being displayed for each of your programs, for your website, for your school as a whole, and say, is that really the image we want to portray? And in this case, you can see I was able to work with the web developers and find much more appropriate pictures to use on across all of BCTE's sites. It's like, this just looks a lot better. So really good for the non-trad page. All right, so on the non-trad page, enough about pictures. When you're on that page, there will be a list of about 7 different things that might be resources that you could use. So I'm going to take you to each one of them very quickly. And I think I need my glasses on because tabs are so tiny at the top of that screen. Let me see what's there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the one called SIP codes aligned with non-trad occupations. This is a new and improved version of what used to be the SIP, non-trad SIP list, which only listed post-secondary level SIPs. And we updated this last summer or the year before to post all the SIP codes. It's 9 pages long now if you printed it out. All the SIP codes that are offered at either the secondary adult or post-secondary levels. That way, no matter which level of instruction you work with us at, you can find what you need in one stop right here. So this was more user-friendly for the whole field. I'm thinking there's a way you could use this list, not just for yourself as a professional to say, is my program non-trad? By now you should know that one way or another. But you could use this as a teaching or counseling tool with students by being able to look at, we'll just stick with ag, you know how the SIP code structure works, that the 0-1 point, everything that's that number starting is an ag SIP, and you can see them all listed here, ag. Okay. Then within that, there's the breakdown that occurs. For instance, let's go to applied HORT, which happens to be offered at all 3 program levels of instruction. And that SIP is 01, 06, 01. So maybe there's a student, male or female. At this point, I'm not worrying about talking about the gender, but just as a teaching tool to say, well, I've really liked my work here in the secondary program. I think I want to go on, not sure, maybe I want to specialize. You come to this tool with them and you can easily point out the very closely related SIP codes that are tied to applied HORT, because they all start with 01.06, and you can see them listed here. Maybe somebody would really think turf grass management is the way to go. Golf courses are the future of this country. That might be a spot where it's offered at the post-secondary, and we could steer somebody that way who knew they wanted to be able to use what they'd learned at the secondary level, but they didn't really want to run a greenhouse, let's say. There's lots of other ways people could go and use the knowledge you're helping them learn in their secondary program. So this, again, it's a big list. You could use that for any of the program areas you teach to be able to kind of look at what the career pathways are that tie into their SIP codes. All right, enough on that one. Move into another one. So then there's some very short documents here. And I'm not reading every line on all of these because I want to go to lunch too today. So the first one, though, under the SIP code list is called Checking Text for Bias. And this one gives you some ideas for if you're reviewing a new textbook, whether it's electronic or hard copy version, whether you're looking at a website or an online curriculum and trying to decide, is this a website you want your students to be using? Some questions that you as an educator should be thinking about before you tell students, go to this site, use this information, are what are those illustrations and photographs on the site? What are they depicting? What's the proportion of males, females, minorities, whites, able, disabled? How do those compare? Are all individuals being portrayed as equally capable? Who's doing and who's doing the watching? Those are 2 different levels of skill needed there, doing and watching. Who's the doers? And some other questions to think about there. I promised I wouldn't read them all, and I won't. Something else in that site is called Equity Tips for Counseling. I'm sure we probably have some counselors in the group, and frankly, anybody who helps a child make up their mind, especially sitting in those middle school IEP transition meetings, you're a counselor. No matter what your other credential says, you're helping to provide counseling to students on their career choices. So here's some tips for equity to help students think about expanding their options. For instance, we want to encourage students to make career decisions based on their abilities, their interests, not their gender. Encourage students to pursue a career, even though people in the field are primarily the other gender. Doesn't matter if number 1 means they really think they like it. about 5 lines down there, an important one I think that all career counselors, instructors should be doing with talking about with students is discuss the impact of career choice on wages. Remember at the top of this session, I talked about one of our goals is to help students choose careers that enable them to have a family sustaining wage. Well, what are the career choices that will lead to a family sustaining wage? That's an important part of counseling and helping to guide students into a productive path for when they're out of high school, when they're out of college, when they're earning money, and we hope they're productive citizens as well as taxpayers. All right, enough on that one. Here's a little very short refresher on what the 7 forms of bias were. I mentioned earlier, you might want to be sure that probably your faculty has already had professional development around the ideas of implicit bias, and you probably covered this, but if it's been a while since you've done those professional developments on your campus, this might be a piece you want to look at and maybe use this to do just a little bit more professional discussions around, are we still maintaining that impartialness or that inclusiveness rather than setting up barriers that seem to preclude some people from choosing one program or another or one activity or another at our campus. Linguistic bias down here has become so important now. You know, it was the he, she, now it's the they. You know, with the idea over gender fluidity, that linguistic bias becomes even more important to be thinking about in what you're writing and how you're speaking. All right, and moving on, there is another sheet on there called Recruitment and Retention Tips Sheet, and it gives you some ideas again here. First one, best recruitment tool is an effective program. Going back to, do your students like the program they're in? Are they willing to talk it up? Do they talk it up on the bus when they're headed home to their friends who maybe would decide to come to your school next year or enroll in the CTE programs at the other end of the high school next year when it's their turn to make that choice? Word of mouth, your very, very best friends. I mentioned looking at websites. Again, good idea just to review those. What does yours look like? What message is it putting out there? I have seen some schools' websites where there's no issue about who's being portrayed on the website. Do we have enough males? Do we have enough females, etc.? Because there's no people on those schools' websites. That's one way around it, but not being able to see people in action doing things wasn't the most interesting website to me when I looked at the few that I saw that were that way. And that's just my editorial comment. And I think the last choice on here on the non-trad page was, this one's called Using Role Models to Encourage Non-Trad Participation. Again, going back to the idea from the quote from the Heckinger report, that students are more likely to choose a career if they see someone who looks like them, if they can make that connection to them. So you're looking for a role models who can be that person who looks like me, person I can relate to sort of individual to help promote programming in CTE. Role models could be parents, and oftentimes they are. Community members, could be recent grads. Those are really great if you can get recent grads back to, you know, help talk about the program. This is what I did, I really liked it, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I promised not to read them all, so I didn't. Okay. Now, the other thing that's on, that was on my last slide, I had a link to a video. Last year, we did a series of 5-part webinar series entitled Broadening Student Participation in CTE. As part of that series, every month, every time we did a session, there was a short, no more than 5-minute video of a student who represented at least 2 or more special populations categories, talking about what made them decide to become a CTE student. I'm going to show you one of those clips now, and hopefully it doesn't shoot down everything else in my program here. And last time I did this, I wound up shutting myself out of Zoom. So Erin, if I go out, I'll try and get back in. All right, so it's a YouTube video. It's about Christina Perez. Here we go. Aaron, if you can't hear it, tell me.
Yes, we're not hearing the audio for Christina.
Okay, so we're not hearing that audio?
No.
Bummer. Okay.
Cindy, click on that microphone, the third icon, and see if it's up. Your volume's up. No, it is.
It was.
Or it was.
It-
I think.
yeah, it's back up all the way.
Yeah, it is.
All right. All right. All right. Never if not adaptable. We will skip that and just not go there. Those video clips are available. They're resources that you can get. Shoot me an email if you would like to have access to that clip, but I've taught school way too many years to know if you can't get the film strip to work, now I'm dating myself, of course, you just go with plan B. So plan B is send me an email. I'll be glad to share that video clip with you. Okay, and that brings me to the end of my notes. There's my contact information. There's the email to send if you would like more information about anything I spoke about with you this morning. And Aaron or Patty, do we have any questions that need answered?
There was one question in the chat when you were talking about the enthusiastic student. You said she asked if you could please repeat the question about the enthusiastic student.
Well, let me find that. There we go. All right, that was on page 8. All right. Are CTE students so enthusiastic about their program that they will recruit their peers? That's the question. And then I made the comment that satisfied customers can be some of your best recruiters. Thank you for asking. Anybody else? Well, that just says I answered everybody's questions, either that or everybody logged off and went to lunch early. Anybody else? I'm good. If not, can all go for lunch. I see we had around 50 people in this session today. I want to thank you so much for choosing to be in this session to learn more about non-trad student recruitment. I appreciate your attention and just the fact that you logged in to be with me this morning. Thanks so much.